So today's session is federally funded procurements. Just a quick overview of procurement at UMD. We have a number of procurement methods that are available for the campus. How many of you are actively used or P card holders? A number of you, I'm seeing heads nod. So, and a big thank you to those of you who have turned your cameras on. I will admit it's a little bit odd to present to like little boxes with just names in them. So I'm really thankful for those of you who are showing your face today. Makes it feel much more personable. Thinking about some of the different ways that we buy, we buy goods on a regular basis using P card, and within P card there are approvals that are set up as part of that process. With delegated procurements, there are also thresholds that are set up for the routing of documents, and we'll talk about all of these things as we go through the session today. Some of the different thresholds that we have are, our $5,000 P card limit, our $25,000 delegated procurement limit for the generation of what we refer to as automated purchase orders, the $200,000 simplified acquisition threshold. There's one for the feds that's a little bit different. At the federal level, you'll see that it's $250,000, but for us at the University of Maryland, our simplified acquisition threshold is actually lower than the federal. So that's what we adhere to. And the feds give us the latitude to do that. Competitive solicitations greater than or equal to $200,000, we are required by the state of Maryland to publicly post those, and by the University System of Maryland. We have a $50,000 strategic contract limit, so you can actually engage in shell shop catalog procurements up to $50,000 without having to do competitive solicitations, et cetera. The state of Maryland has a number of different approvals. Our big approval is the Board of Public Works approvals. And those occur for any level of services, contract services that are not maintenance related, that are not in an excluded category, that are over $1 million. We have to route those for Board of Public Works approval. And then any contract we enter into that's greater than or equal to $5 million must go to the Board of Regents. So we're good for the next slide. Just some of the procurement functions and responsibilities that we have in the Department of Procurement and things that we can assist you with that you may or may not be aware of. Procurement can provide a vital role in helping you to source goods and services. We can assist you with finding different kinds of contracts that are available for use. We can assist you with finding hard to source providers. Every now and then we get something that comes up. Lab coat laundering is a great example of this, where we're presently trying to find somebody who can help us with laundering lab coats on campus, which, believe it or not, is not an easy thing to find. So we do have somebody who's working on sourcing that. We occasionally get things like that that we help campus departments find. Bidding is an activity that we are actively engaged in, and for a competitive solicitation to be considered a formal solicitation, it needs to be conducted by the procurement office. We also assist with contract review, negotiation, and routing. We regularly collaborate with the Office of General Counsel, with different groups on campus to get their feedback and input on contracts. And then we pull it all together and do the redlining back and forth and the negotiation back and forth with the contractor. And then we also do the routing for any levels of approvals that are required related to signing that contract. We are involved in contract signature, completion, and management. So when we enter into a contract, procurement is the official signer for any procurement contract. We make sure that the contract is completed properly and in accordance with all of the compliance that's required. And we are part of that management of the contract after the fact. So if we enter into a contract on behalf of your department, if you run into any sticking points with that supplier or contractor and you need assistance, please call us early when you might have an issue with a contractor so we can intervene early and you don't get to a place of frustration that's so significant that you just want to terminate the contract. If you involve us early in anything that's not going well, we can help to mitigate and can help with facilitating a good discussion with the contractor to have greater clarification, to make sure that the contract goes well. Compliance and reporting. Procurement is involved in a variety of compliance functions. Number one, making sure that all of our contracts are done in a way that we're not going to find ourselves in an audit situation downstream. Procurements are constantly audited. So we get audited by the federal government. We get audited by the Office of Legislative Audits on a 3-year base, about every 3 years. We get audited by external auditors, internal auditors. We go through a number of reviews. Compliance is something that's core to our function because we do get audited with regularity. We also are involved in a variety of state mandated reporting and in some cases reporting for federal government, like with the subcontract reporting. So compliance and reporting is also part of what we do. And if I'm speaking quickly, I do apologize. We have a lot of ground to cover here today. So please do put your questions into the chat and we'll make sure they get answered. Signature authority and why it matters. Signature authority on UMD's campus, and this is true for most universities, is delegated here at University of Maryland. It's delegated by the president, and it is delegated to specific roles. Those roles have the ability to make different kinds of commitments on behalf of the university. There was a recent letter that was issued October 8th, and that letter has been provided in some of the attachments that will come along with the presentation. After the fact, what I did was I submitted to Ebony a number of different documents that I thought you might all find useful rather than have to speak to all of them and show them all today. This letter is one of them that's been included in that packet of information. That letter of signature delegation calls out very specifically who has authority to make commitments on behalf of the institution, whether they're personnel commitments, whether they're research commitments, the procurement authority, etc. So procurement has a unique type of signature authority in that we have the ability to make external commitments when it comes to procurements and in signing contracts. Campus departments do not have the authority to enter into contracts. And in the state of Maryland, this becomes very important because if you have a PI or someone in your department who makes a commitment to buy something and they have not obtained a PO and or they've signed an agreement, the state of Maryland does not recognize that because that individual does not have the authority to enter into that agreement. And right or wrong, the individual who signs that agreement could potentially be personally responsible for anything that they sign. So it's really important that people not sign things that they're not authorized to sign in our environment. And it could be a violation of state law, which is a whole other piece that makes it a little bit frightening because in the state of Maryland, you could literally go to jail for agreeing to things that the state doesn't allow us to agree to. So it's just something to remember about that. And apparent authority is a situation where somebody represents that they have the authority to enter into an agreement when they don't have it. In the state of Maryland does not recognize that. So you sign an agreement, you could be on your own. And that's something for people to really understand because it's not a small thing.
And we got a couple questions that came
I
up
see
about that. The first one is, does this include signing at any purchase level?
Yes. It doesn't matter if it's $2 or $5 million. Campus departments, PIs, et cetera, do not have the authority to sign a contract. So if you have an agreement that if you get a quotation from a supplier, and I'll use software as an example because that's a pretty easy example, because every bit of software that we buy has a license agreement that comes with it, whether it's a click-through agreement or it's some other kind of agreement. So if you're acquiring software for use and there's an agreement, make sure you connect with somebody in procurement to review that agreement because we need to, there are certain terms and conditions we absolutely cannot agree to. And we need to make sure that those get negotiated out. So if a supplier presents you with something that requires a signature, please send it on to procurement. We do have an email address. It's delegatedprocurement@umd.edu. And you can route anything that's under the delegated limit that requires a signature, route it to that email address.
And then a question came up. Will the instructions be changed in the standard consultant agreement that's posted on the procurement website to reflect it?
That agreement is one of those things that I lose sleep over at night. It's a very old agreement. It's antiquated. The language in it is not current. I have been actively working with the Office of General Counsel. Really, this is so current. And thank you for asking this question. We've been working together to come up with new documents for use for consultants, for foreign individuals or international individuals that independent contractors that we might need to help us with something on a research project. And I know that's been a real sticking point for us recently with tax laws. So we're working on that, and we're working to provide you with new documents and to update our terms and conditions. So this is something that is presently in the works, to update those documents and to provide better instruction on how and when to use them and who has the authority to sign them. So yes, we are updating those things. And, you know, the counter signature for the department is one thing on that agreement. Counter signature is not the same as being the only signer or the authorized signer. Oftentimes, like in that consulting agreement, we want the department's signature on it so that it's clear to us that the department has reviewed the scope of work and what the consultant's to do before we sign that consulting agreement. So that's the reason for the department counter signature. I don't know right now whether or not we'll have a department counter signature on a new reconstituted consulting agreement. Hopefully I answered everyone's questions. Yes, it is confusing, and my hope is with the new document, we will remove some of the confusion around the two signatures. Because really what we need on any agreement is we need the signature of the supplier or the contractor, and we need the signature of somebody who's authorized to make the commitment. Having the department sign in addition to that just is something that confirms the department's understanding. So it is confusing the way that it's set up presently, and we will look to resolve that. So just a quick snapshot of the procurement methods at UMD. You know, as many of you know, we have the ability to buy with our P card, through Shell Shop, through an automated PO that's done as a delegated procurement, and through the what I'll call purchase order function, which would be POs that are issued that are over 25,000 that may or may not have a signed contract that accompanies them.
I'm sorry, a question that came up earlier about the 25,000, and you can see if you want to answer it here. And the question is, will sole sources now be over $25,000?
And I will cover that as I get a little further in.
Okay, thank you.
So hopefully we're answering some folks' questions around some of these things around signature authority, and there's a lot to cover, and we have a lot of updating that we're in the process of doing with some of our documentation. Just to do a quick run through of P card uses and limitations. Our P card program is governed by the state of Maryland. It does have a fixed $5,000 limit on it. That is not something that's in our control. That is limited by the state of Maryland. It also has restricted use. So there are some things you're not able to do with your P card, either based on how the supplier or contractor is classified, or it's based on the type of transaction. For instance, you are not allowed to buy gift cards is a really good example of what you're not allowed to do with your P card. And buying a gift card will result in an automatic suspension, a 45-day suspension of your card. I mean, the state is really strict about these things. We are as well. The other piece that's not allowed is splitting transactions. That's known as stringing. It's not allowed with the P card. It's also not allowed with delegated procurements. So you are not allowed to split a transaction amongst many transactions to try and get a procurement through the system using your P card or using automated POs. So just bear that in mind. And if in a review of P card transactions, we discover that somebody is splitting transactions to get them under the $5,000 threshold, your card will be suspended for 45 days. So please bear that in mind. I see there's a question around who decides how a vendor is classified, the state or the vendor. The supplier actually, it's really dependent on what the supplier sells, and the supplier determines their MCE codes and the categories they are put into with the banking institution based upon the types of things that they sell. So that's not something that's decided by the state. That's decided by, I'm speaking off the top of my head here. I am not a P card expert, though I've had a lot of experience with it. Likely the banking institutions and the card institutions like Visa and MasterCard and the contractor or supplier determine the MCE codes based on what they sell. To give you a little bit of idea of the volume of P card transactions that we have at Maryland, you all are a very active P card community. We have at any given time roughly 1,700 P cards on campus. And as you can see, we have an annual spend that ranges from $43 million a year to upwards of $60 million a year in 2019 with 123,000 transactions, and fiscal year 2021 is not necessarily a representative year in light of COVID, but you can see in 2019 we had almost 250,000 P card transactions. That is a significant volume of transactions. So you all are quite busy out there in the community. And there's a lot going on there. So delegated procurements. The limit on delegated procurement is $25,000. And when we increased the micro purchase threshold, we did this so that we would have the same limit for everybody across campus. Now, some things to bear in mind, even though it's a delegated procurement, you should always obtain a quotation or proposal from the supplier. Review the quotation carefully. And I would say, if you're the person who's the requisitioner and you're working either on behalf of a PI or you're working with the PI on an acquisition or a procurement, really review the quotation carefully. And there are a couple of key things to look at. One of the pieces, and this is something that I have in tips and tricks a little later, is be sure to look at the shipping terms, because shipping terms are really important on two fronts. It's not just about who pays for freight, it's also about the point at which the university takes ownership of the item. So where this becomes important is during COVID, we had a number of shipments, and a number of you probably experienced this, where you had shipments that never made it to your building or got dropped at different doors or ended up in the shrubbery somewhere, or it was just, we had a number of issues with shipments. When we take delivery at shipping point, we're basically saying that we take ownership. When it's shipping point, we take ownership at that supplier's dock. So we own it while it's en route to us. So what happens in those situations where it's shipping point is if that shipment never reaches you, you have to file the claim with the shipper. That administrative burden falls to the university to file the claim with the shipper and to follow up on what happened to the shipment. If instead it's destination is always preferable, because then the supplier owns the product until it reaches you. So that's one of those pieces that you want to be able to negotiate with the supplier to say, no, we don't want to take shipping point. Sometimes paying the freight charges, I mean, that's important, but that might not be as important as where the point at which you take ownership of product. So just remember that shipping point means you own it from their point forward. Destination means you own it once it hits the campus and once it's at the dock. So that's a really important point to know. And it's worth negotiating that, because if there's a problem with the shipment, you want to be able to call that supplier and say, I never got it, and it's their problem, not your problem. That's one piece to look at. The other part is we pay on a net 30-day basis. If they have anything that's different than net 30, that's going to be a problem for us, because we cannot pay faster than net 30. The state pays our bills, and there's a process we have to go through with the invoice process before it gets to the state, and the state commits to 30 days, but we don't commit to a shorter cycle than that. So again, that's something that you want to make sure gets handled in the process of that final quote that you accept. Attach a copy of the proposal or quotation to the requisition. That way, when it flows to the fiscal officer for approval, they have all the information they need to be able to approve that through so that it can become a purchase order. And the PO goes from requisition and turns into a purchase order at the point in time that the fiscal officer approves it forward. So you should get a note then that comes back that says that that PO is ready to print and go to the supplier. And I see we have some questions. Oh,
Yes, we have a question here. What if the supply goods cover a wide range of products and their MCE code is prohibitive towards a P card purchase? Is there a workaround other than getting a PO, as that can be time consuming to get paid out?
unfortunately, there's not. So, a good example that we had with this is we've tried really hard during COVID. As many of you may or may not know, we stood up the digital storefront last year to provide PPE and different goods to campus, whether, from masks to gloves to hand sanitizer to wipes. We tried really hard to work with a local area company to get hand sanitizer. Turns out they were a distillery and they were making hand sanitizer because they really shifted their production from liquor to making hand sanitizer. We thought we would be able to work with them on a P card basis. Turns out we couldn't, because distilleries are prohibited, and for good reasons, are a prohibited MCE code. So we had to work with them on a PO basis, and unfortunately it fell apart. We were really hoping to work with a local area company and do something like that to give back to the community. It just didn't work out because we weren't able to work with them because of their MCE code. So that's an example of it. And in some cases, while companies may provide a wide array of goods that you want to buy from them, if their MCE code is prohibitive, you may have to get the goods somewhere else to be able to use your P card, or you may have to work with them on a PO basis. We don't have another end run for you.
Our next question was, let me go back here. Is there a list of terms and conditions that procurement recommends we can regularly review for?
There is not. And, that's a piece of why we tell you, if there are terms and conditions, that if you get a quotation and it's steeped in terms and conditions, send it to procurement so we can work that out with the supplier. Because, or, maybe it's a situation where there's enough work done on campus that we should put a master agreement in place that deals with the terms and conditions, so then you can more readily buy from that supplier. Those are the sorts of things that really, I would say, route it to procurement, because that's really where our expertise lies in terms of reviewing those terms and conditions and getting them sorted out for you. I think there is such a wide range of what suppliers can include on their quotations that if you get something that is really, again, has a lot of terms and conditions with it, we ought to be looking at it for you, because there isn't really an easy list we can give you to say, here's the list. We do have standard terms and conditions that are part of our purchase order. Our purchase order, those terms and conditions do say that our terms and conditions take precedence But we also don't want to be involved in disputes downstream around that if there's an issue with the procurement. So it is best to have that sorted out at the front end and to let us help you with that. And then I see another question. Oh, lots of them. Is the proposal statement of work that is needed to be attached to the requisition, not the vendor signed consulting agreement for delegated procurement? I'm not sure I fully understand the question here. What I would say is if you are working with a consultant and you're using our consulting agreement, I would include both the consulting agreement for the delegated procurement and the statement of work on the as attachments to the requisition so that all of it is there. If a signature is required, procurement's going to look to that requisition to find the documentation for anything that requires a signature from procurement. And I would include as much information and as much additional documentation on the requisition as necessary for somebody to make a good decision about approving that procurement forward.
And can we have another
to provide a lot? Because the challenge is not providing enough, because that means somebody's got to come back to you and ask for it.
Okay, Kim, and we have another question. If you issue an APO to a consultant, but you wish to add additional work over the course of the grant award that will cause the total PO with modifications to exceed the 25K threshold, how should you proceed?
At the onset of that consulting agreement, you need to think about the full scope of work that you're going to want that consultant to do and not piecemeal it. So that's a matter of working with your PI to say, okay, is this a consultant we're going to want to continue to do work with? And is there the potential that this could exceed 25,000? If there's the potential that it's going to exceed 25,000, that needs to be identified at the front end, and we build the consulting agreement around a greater dollar amount. And we can craft it in such a way that you build in the scope of work that you need for today, but then maybe you work with procurement so that we can say, okay, what's the hourly rate for additional work that might be needed downstream? And that gives us the ability to increase it beyond the 25,000. But if you go ahead and do it as an APO, we're not going to amend that APO to increase it beyond 25,000, because that's the limit for a delegated procurement. It's going to require a new purchase order, and it's going to require dealing with things differently. So it's really important to know at the front end if you're going to continue to work with a consultant for the full scope of a contract or a grant. And if we need to estimate that threshold beyond 25,000, we can do that. And we can even put for a period of time, like the initial period you're working with them, we can put a limit on that and then say there may be additional dollars added later. But we need to collect their hourly rates and have the information right up front so we know what it's going to cost us for that additional work that might be needed. But I would say start with expecting it to be greater than that if you really think it will be, because we can't just add on to a delegated procurement.
Okay,
they're not intended for that.
Sorry. Are there posted terms and conditions somewhere that suppliers can review prior or ahead of time?
You know, that's an excellent question. We don't have them posted on our website. We have a link on our PO that directs suppliers there, but we don't generally get involved in going back in terms and conditions unless there's a reason to. So, you know, the lion's share, to give you an idea of the volume of procurements that we're involved in, on a delegated basis in fiscal 2021, you all did 10,588 delegated procurements. That is the lion's share of procurements that were completed in 2021. To give you an idea of that, the over $25,000 procurements, there were approximately 1,800 of those, 90% of which were under 200,000, under the simplified acquisition threshold, and 10% of the 1,800 procurements accounted for 65% of the university's total commitments. So those 10,000 POs that were done were a lot of very low dollar, high frequency transactions. So the extent to which we're going to get involved in going back and forth with the supplier for a transaction that's under $500 or under 2,000 or even under 5,000 is really limited. And we don't very often have suppliers, like I can't think of the number of times, and Ansonia might be able to answer this actually better than I could because she deals with delegated procurements. But I have not had too many incidents where we've issued a PO and after the fact, the suppliers come back and objected to our terms and conditions. I haven't seen that, at least it hasn't risen to my level. And I'm going to call on Ansonia because I see that she's joined us today to kind of tell us, how often have you seen that happen?
Very little.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when I go over terms and conditions, I usually send the university's terms and conditions and they sign it and send it right back.
Yeah.
So
So I would say that
sometimes they
it's yeah, thank you, Ansonia. I really appreciate you chiming in on this because you see much more of it than I would. I think the frequency and objection point is so low that it really doesn't often interfere with what we do. I think oftentimes suppliers, it's on the PO, suppliers don't often challenge it. So to ask you as an end user to try and negotiate that, it would just end up in a prolonged procurement action as opposed to you just being able to issue the PO and get your goods, which is really what a delegated procurement is intended to do, is to give you the ability to quickly get what you need to do the important work that your department's engaged in.
Okay, and one other question for now is, can you route for review and still pay with your P card? And what would be the best email address for review of the terms and conditions if you're paying by P card?
If you're paying by P card, it's going to be delegated procurement at umd.edu. Those do route to a group of people who have ability to get into that email box so that we've got some redundancy in terms of, Ansonia is our person who is our delegated guru. And she handles the vast majority of those, but if she's out for some reason, we do have other people who can go in and pull those and review them. So she reviews them. The delegated procurements group reviews them for P card transactions as well as PO transactions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So shell shop orders. And I don't know how many of you are working with Shell Shop right now, but some of the advantages to Shell Shop, which is our e-procurement solution for the university, is that you're really going to a catalog and filling a shopping cart. That shopping cart will auto-populate a requisition that will route for workflow in KFS. And it gives us the ability to do a couple of things. One, it makes it easier to buy from contracted suppliers and contracted sources. These contracts have all been competitively solicited. So we meet the litmus test for the state of Maryland in terms of buying from contracted suppliers and the competitive solicitation piece. There's also a $50,000 threshold, which makes it also easier to buy a number of goods and services off of those contracts. And the reason the threshold's higher is because those contracts have been competitively solicited. They are available for use. They are considered to be master contracts, and they're for all of campus. The vehicle of Shell Shop is just this idea that it's easier to populate a shopping cart and have a fully automated process from the shopping cart through delivery of the PO to the supplier. So that automated PO gets delivered electronically to the supplier, and you don't have to go through the work of printing the PO and then emailing it to the supplier. So that's one of the benefits of using Shell Shop, is it's a more streamlined process and should be a time savings for you. So hopefully some of you are finding that that's been a benefit and has helped you to get your work done. Any questions about Shell Shop?
Not so much about shell shop, but I did get a question from someone. Will the procurement website be updated to include things that were easier to find in the past, like our list of master contracts and how-tos on various aspects of procurement?
We are in the process of updating our website, and one of those is creating some guidance for campus on how to work with procurement and how to work through some of the different, some of the things that I'm talking with you about today. And providing better guidance for campus in general. The other piece is we do have out, if you go to buy products and services, where we've got contracts in place, those suppliers are listed under buy products and services. So if you click on that part of our website, you should be able to find where we have contracts available that may or may not be in Shell Shop. So we are working to make some of those things clearer in our website 2.0 launch that should be coming shortly. We're kind of slowly updating each of our pages.
Great, thanks, Kim.
So procurements under 25,000, some key aspects of this. Number one, and this is whether it's a PO over 25,000 or under 25,000, they must be completed prior to placing the order. And this is really key. One of the pieces that I provided in the attachments and the documentation is a letter that was sent to campus, I want to say in 2017, around after the fact transactions. After the fact transactions are not permissible. They are considered a bad thing, and they are such a bad thing that our contract review that occurs with regard to our federal procurements, when they come in, they specifically look at after the fact transactions. And if you have too many after the fact transactions as an institution, it literally can put our ability to get future contracts and grants at risk. So it is really important that we make sure that we get POs on the front end before we place an order with the supplier, regardless of the dollar amount, because after the fact transactions will put us at risk in any audit situation. And I can share with you that it was a sticking point. The last time that we had a contract review with the ONR, they came in and they were specifically looking for after the fact transactions. Now, the good news is they didn't find any, but we were really sweating bullets about what transactions they would pull in if they would. So this is something that working with your PIs, working with your research assistants, please make sure that we get the POs in advance of placing the orders. Sourcing. There are a variety of ways to source goods. If you need assistance with sourcing, please reach out to procurement. We are set up now in category teams. So we have people dedicated to contract services. We have people dedicated to scientific goods and services. We have 2 individuals who are dedicated to what we call general goods and services. So if you have something that's a scientific item and you're having difficulty in finding a couple of different sources for it that you want to at least see what's in the market, please feel free to reach out to our folks because we can probably help you with that. Competitive solicitations. Competitive solicitations over 25,000, they need to be performed by procurement. You do need to show for transactions under 25,000 that you've looked at the market, but we need to be sure that we're doing a solicitation for something that's over 25,000. Sole source procurements. Sole source purchases that are over 25,000 require written, valid justification based on specific requirements being met. One of the things I will share with you is if in that justification, the reason to select a supplier is because it costs less, basically what you've told me is that there's a competitive market. So, and we should be competitively bidding that. What we need to know is what's unique about that particular supplier or source that is the reason they are the only place we can get the item. So that really means stick to stick to the discussion around specifications being unique in the marketplace, and that this really is the only place we can go to get something. And then lastly, one of the things that we make sure of is that for anything over 25,000, we make sure that all the universities and states' terms and conditions are met. And I see we have a couple of questions.
We do. So at times we get subcontract agreements from federal awards to another university several months after the project started. And then we need to issue a consultant agreement, which turns out to be after the fact. What do you advise? That we truncate the year one performance period based on the delay in getting the subcontract in KFS 3 months after this project start date?
Okay, so I'm just thinking through this because this is a multi-level question. Looking through this. So subcontract agreements from federal awards to another university. So I might actually, in order to answer this question, I would probably have a few questions, quite frankly, because there's likely more to this than what appears on the surface. And I don't know the frequency with which this happens, that we get subcontract agreements issued to another university. You know, what I don't know on this is if it's a when we talk about a subcontract agreement, are we talking about a subrecipient award that we're placing with somebody who's going to do work, or a true subcontract agreement where we're doing a procurement and issuing a consulting agreement? Because we treat subrecipient awards differently than we treat subcontract agreements. So I guess I need to understand a little bit more about I need to understand more about the specific situation before giving it an answer on this, because I don't want to just answer generally.
Right, so she answered, we are a subrecipient, and as part of our work, we have to issue a consultant agreement.
Okay, so
Yes.
that helps to clarify it. I guess the other question I would have is, you know, what do you advise that we truncate the year one performance period? I think it's always advisable if you have something like that that comes up that's unusual, where you're already headlong into something, you know, how did you end up connecting with the consultant in advance of getting this consulting agreement in place? I mean, those are some of the things that we need to understand. Is you're a subrecipient, you have to hire a consultant, but why would the consultant start the work before you have the consulting agreement in place? It's always best to get that consulting agreement in place in advance of a consultant starting the work. Because what that does is, if you have the agreement in place, we issue the PO, the other thing that happens is we don't get backed up on the payment side. So what can happen is, if you start the work before the consulting agreement and the PO are in place, you also create a situation where we're in arrears on payments, because we have no ability to pay until the PO is in place. So I would say, yeah, it's best to get the agreement in place right at the start and not have that consultant start the work before you have the agreement in place. It's never a good idea to start work in advance of having an agreement in place. So I hope I answered your question. It's kind of a difficult question to answer, honestly. And it's hard to do it through chat and not be able to have a conversation on it.
And one other question that came to me directly is there an organizational chart so that the departments can see who in procurement is available for what?
We actually do have a contacts page on our website that should list the buying staff by team and who's assigned to which categories.
Okay,
And that's a recent update to our webpage.
great, thanks.
So micro purchase threshold, and this is what you've all been waiting for now that we've gone through some of the basics of procurement. The micro purchase threshold is part of the uniform guidance. Originally, that was set at $3,000, and those of us in procurement, and I was part of a group early on at the onset of the uniform guidance at another institution. where we did a federal demonstration project. And part of that was because that micro purchase threshold caused so many of the institutions who are R1s and are actively engaged with the federal government on research, caused us so much heartburn because it was set at such a low level. It was below our P card thresholds in many cases. It was going to cause a lot of our procurements to come to a screeching halt, because it essentially required anything over that amount for us to engage in competition. So we worked very hard, and Koger did an excellent job of working with the federal government to raise that threshold. And recently, last August, they came out with an update, and the update allowed us to self-certify to increase the micro purchase threshold. So we issued a letter to our cognizant agency increasing our micro purchase threshold to 25,000. That was rolled out 6/30 of 2021. So what this means is that you have the ability as campus departments to, number one, made our delegated authority limit the same for federal procurements as it was for all other procurements on campus. So that consistency makes life a little easier because you don't have to think about the funding source. Number two, it helped us from a consistency standpoint. So when we go through audits in the future, we'll be able to say, well, yes, our micro purchase threshold and our delegated procurements limit is absolutely the same. We treat those procurements the same way, and we're consistent across the board. Auditors love to see that. What I will also say is that the micro purchase and the uniform guidance and micro purchase threshold does impose some things on us that are a little bit different than some of our other procurements. When you're buying items that are federally funded and are below the micro purchase threshold, there is still a need to demonstrate competition and fair and reasonable pricing. Now, what that means is that if you're buying something that's under that delegated limit, hop out into the internet, look for the item, and print a page where you can show that you found it at another source and the price is better from the source that you're buying it from. And retain that documentation, because an auditor will ask the question at some point. If they're doing an audit of your contract or your grant, they'll ask, well, where's the demonstration that the price you paid was fair and reasonable? And fair and reasonable is a term that the feds like. It's a term that we use regularly in procurement, and they like open and competitive and fair and reasonable pricing. So they want to see that you at least did some sort of market research to show that you were paying a reasonable price. And some things that, in some cases, you might be paying a few cents more for something than where you could get it somewhere else, but maybe you could get it faster. And so that speed to getting it is sometimes a valid reason for paying a little bit more. Maybe the item isn't exactly apples to apples, and what you're getting is a higher quality product than what you found somewhere else. Again, quality of product might be one of those things where you can say, yeah, we paid a few pennies more here, but we got a better product. And in the end, that's going to result in better research. So those are a couple things to bear in mind, because we all get audited. Your contracts and grants get audited, and you want to make sure you have that documentation available should they come through and want to see it. And attaching it to the requisition is an excellent way to retain it, because it keeps everything right there with the requisition. The types of documents that can be kept as proof of researching a fair price might just be a screenshot of what you find online. It might be a quotation from that supplier. Ideally it's a quotation, but sometimes if you're ordering something that's, a small amount of money, it's $500, going through the effort to get a formal quotation from a supplier might not be worth it, but you can get a screenshot off of a website that shows the supplier's price, and that's adequate for what the feds are going to look for. So you don't always have to get a quote from every supplier. You can go out there and look at the market and take a screenshot of a supplier's website that shows their pricing. And I would say for the lower dollar transactions, that's suitable. You know, when you get upwards of $10,000, it's a good idea to get a quotation just so that you've got that. But, you know, I do think for some of the lower dollar transactions, it's fine to take a snapshot from a supplier's website as proof that you did some market research. Additional requirements for federally funded activities, federal flow downs. The federal flow downs attach to the procurements that we do. We do have standard sets of federal flow downs. Those are also included in the documentation that I've provided today that's coming in the packet. So for cooperative agreements and grants, they flow down from the uniform guidance. For contract flow downs, they come from the FAR and the DFAR, and most of you probably already know this. They are also, both KFS and Shell Shop provide an option to select the funding source so that the flow downs will automatically attach to the purchase order and flow to the supplier. So we did that as part of the work that we did with the micro purchase threshold, is we made sure those options were available. So in KFS, there's a box you can click that identifies whether it's a contract or a grant or cooperative agreement or a contract. And then the appropriate terms and conditions note will auto-populate in the notes to vendor. In Shell Shop, there's another way that you select for that, and the flow downs will go with your purchase order. We've also, one of the benefits to shopping through Shell Shop of any of the contracts is that we've already negotiated the flow downs into those contracts. So if you're using a shopping cart technology, those terms and conditions have already been accepted. There are also times restrictions associated with the funding, and it's really important to know what those restrictions are. So I will also say that if you're supporting a PI, make sure your PI is aware of the restrictions that come along with their funding and what they can and can't buy as part of that contract or grant, because sometimes they're very specific about what's included and what's not. And you don't want to get all the way down the path of getting a quotation and doing all the work only to find out that, yeah, it's not going to make it, the procurement's not going to make it through because it's not allowable. So I see there's another quotation here, or another question. Got quotation on the brain. So we've got a couple of questions here. If we set specific rates for consultants, is it necessary to obtain a quote from them? One of the things I would be careful about is setting specific rates for consultants. What I would engage in is asking them for their rates, having them provide a quotation with their rates, and then you may want to talk with them about negotiating these rates down or that sort of thing. But I would be very careful about doing anything that is rate setting, because you don't want to get involved in anything that could be potentially perceived as price fixing. That is against the law, and we don't have the ability to, across a group of suppliers, tell them what they can charge us. We can ask them for their rates and we can negotiate their rates down, but we are not typically in the practice of setting pricing for suppliers or consultants. They have to determine their rates and the rates they're willing to charge us. So I'd be very careful about how I go about determining rates and the language I use in explaining how we negotiate rates with contractors. Just, it's a fine point, but it's something to be aware of. And then the next question is consultants are specifically budgeted in the proposal and awarded without any modifications, do we still need a quote showing the rate and total cost? I would still get the, even if a consultant is specifically budgeted in the proposal, when it comes time to execute that consulting agreement, we do need to have a quote demonstrating those rates and with the total cost from the consultant, because that procurement or that consulting agreement that gets signed is separate and apart from what you budgeted in your proposal. So that's really the formal time where you're saying we're making this commitment with federal funding to you as a consultant, that we're going to spend X amount with you and you're going to perform X scope of work, and we're solidifying that. When you do it as part of the budget proposal, you're having the conversation, but you're not making the commitment at that point. And if something were to happen with that consultant and they're no longer available, you still may need a consultant, but it might be somebody else that you end up with. So you still have to have that formal consulting agreement. Oh, there is so much to cover. Thank you, Ebony, for the time check. And procurement tips. I see we've zoomed through a few things. Just a few procurement tips again. Always obtain the PO and complete the contract before placing an order with the supplier or engaging in the work. Contact procurement if you need help or guidance. We are here to help you. And I say that, and I know you all groan and go, oh yeah, like the IRS is here to help us. But no, we really do want to help you, and we want to make sure that we do the best for you and for the campus that we can. Obtain quotations from suppliers for delegated orders. These will be looked for by auditors. And again, it can be a snapshot that shows some level of market research, but be sure you have that. And don't engage in stringing activities. That is something that, whether it's your P card or a PO, it's frowned upon, it gets looked for in audits, and we don't want to look like we're trying to circumvent the policies and procedures of the institution or Maryland state law or the things that the federal government requires of us. So thank you for your time today. I do apologize if I couldn't get through all the slides or get to all of your questions. And again, additional procurement tips: don't sign anything from the supplier with the exception of receiving documents. Signing and receiving documents that you got the goods is a good thing. If a supplier requests a signature on a document, please route it to procurement for review and negotiation and signature. And freight terms matter. And that's one of those that it can be really costly. The other tidbit that I'll give you is if you are importing something from another country and we are the importer of record, please reach out to us, because there's a whole other set of costs that can accrue. And there is a whole other set of shipping terms that apply that can be very, very costly, and procurement can help you navigate that import process. So just, a few procurement tips. I'm sorry we couldn't get through all the slides today. Your questions were wonderful, and please feel free to reach out to us with questions. Again, we are here to help, and we want to be able to assist you through the process.